Hi, my name is Dr. Jamal Rasheed, President and CEO of the Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library. Welcome to the Ellis County African American Museum and Library, where you get an opportunity to tour the facilities, get yourself educated, and take a deep look into the past of African Americans and perhaps the future of African Americans. As you enter the Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library, the first room that you come to is our flag room. In the flag room are different artifacts from various parts of Africa, primarily the countries along the west coast of Africa, which were part of the Atlantic slave trade, or what's known as the Triangle. They're masked from various locations along the west coast of Africa, along with pictures of kings and queens who represented the countries of Africa. You cannot talk about African American history without talking about where we came from, and that, of course, is Africa. The flag room. In the flag room, as you enter the Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library, the flag room represents all 54 countries on the continent of Africa. You get a chance to see the different colors and the designs and the symbols which represent the continent of Africa, all 54 countries. As you peruse through the room and you look at the different artifacts, the flags, the mask, the spears, even jewelry that represents the motherland. In the early 1500s, the slave trade began by the Dutch. However, the slave trade bringing Africans to America began to become a part of the commercialized business in 1619, making the trade from England to Africa to the United States and back to England, called the Triangle. Throughout the Triangle, many ships made the voyage, bringing goods from England, trading those goods in Africa, trading for slaves, taking the slaves to the America of the New World, and then going back to the continent of England. Along that route, that journey, that dreaded journey, many slaves were added on to ships. They were brought on to ships and made that journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Many didn't make it across the Atlantic Ocean in the hulls of many ships that brought them. Once they landed in Jamestown, Virginia, the beginning port for the slave trade, then they were sold. They were sold to various plantation owners here in the United States, sold for goods and services, and privatized. The slaves were considered private property of the masters. Slaves were brought to the United States primarily to work for free in the industry of cotton, tobacco, and sugarcane plantations along the Atlantic seaboard. Once they landed here, they were broken away from their families. Children were separated from their mothers and fathers. Fathers were separated. They went through a process called conditioning until they were ready to be sold to the slave masters. We go from the slave ships and the brutal beatings and the brutal harboring beneath the slave ships, slowly to a point where the slaves were beginning to rebel or free themselves from the slave masters, an era around 1831. 1831, the slaves began to rebel for their rights and for their freedom. By 1865, or prior to 1865, you had Harriet Tubman, otherwise known as the leader of the Underground Railroad, helping to move slaves along the Underground Railroad from the South to the North for freedom. By 1865, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, so-called freeing the slaves. However, there were many who refused to allow the slaves to be freed, primarily in the states in the South, which created the Civil War between the North and the South. The South continued to want to have the slaves to do the free labor, and so they pushed for making sure that the slaves in the South remained slaves, which is why Harriet Tubman led the Underground Railroad. At the end of the Underground Railroad, those persons, or those slaves who were on that ship, made their way to the northern states, Philadelphia, Massachusetts, New York, where they found newfound freedoms. Along that route, and after the Emancipation Proclamation, the Freedmen's Bureau was established. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to create an opportunity for education for the new freed slaves, health care for the new freed slaves, and to teach them different ways of life and to enjoy their newfound freedoms. However, it did not end there, for you found organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan that was founded in 1865. Those persons who were still a part of the South and fought to keep slaves in freedom refused to allow those freedoms to be enjoyed by the newfound slaves. However, the struggle continued. Through the 1800s, after the Emancipation Proclamation, Africans in America began to educate themselves in the northern schools and church-based schools. Howard University was one of those first founded. Fisk University was one of the first founded, and Cheney was one of the first black colleges and universities founded. And they began to move along and educate themselves, but the struggle continued. For years, over 400 and something years now, the African American are still struggling for freedom, justice, and equality. There have been several organizations that have been founded, beginning with the Prince Hall Masons in 1775, which was the first African American fraternity in this country, founded by a gentleman named Prince Hall in his struggle for freedom, justice, and equality, and actually founded the first African American school in this country. After the Prince Hall Masons was founded, the next major organization that was founded was the NAACP, followed by the fraternities and the sororities, all fighting for social change and social action. Outside of the educated organizations founded who fought for freedom, justice, and equality, then came CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, the Urban League, to make sure that our freedoms were moved into being able to have the right to have jobs and empower African Americans. Other organizations other than CORE, NAACP, and the Urban League were followed by the Pullman Porters, an organization of African Americans who rode the trains as servants and were the black porters on the trains throughout the country and throughout this nation. After the Pullman Porters was founded, we had another organization. We began to look back into organizations that were looking for religious freedoms as well as economic freedoms. And the Nation of Islam was founded by Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. However, prior to the founding of the Nation of Islam, you had Marcus Garvey, who was a part of the Pan-African movement, and Noble Drew Ali, who sought to bring us the true religion of those persons who had came over on the ships in Africa. Now, mind you, I'll back up a little bit. African Americans were brought to this country in 1619, and it wasn't until 1775 that they were allowed to practice any religion at all. The white counterparts felt fearful making African Americans Christians. However, they allowed the first church to be founded in this country for African Americans in around 1775 and 1776. That's almost 100 years that Africans here in America could not practice an organized religion, nor could they practice their own religion. So following the founding of the Nation of Islam around 1935, various other spin-off things began to happen in this country in the quest for freedom, justice, and equality. Ebony magazine was founded by John H. Johnson, the first African-American magazine to report and discuss things that were taking place in this country. Shortly after the founding of the Jet magazine, we entered the Civil Rights Movement. But let me back up before we get to the Civil Rights Movement and talk about the Tulsa riot, otherwise known as the Black Wall Street, where we in this country did have economic opportunities and a lot of opportunities where we were able to take care of ourselves and do our own thing, so to speak. So, but that was destroyed when there was a racist outcry that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Moving forward to the Civil Rights Movement, which most of you may be familiar with, which actually began when Emmett Till, a young man from Chicago, was hung and mutilated in Monee, Mississippi in the early 1950s, thus leading to other disasters and things that happened to African Americans. The person you're most familiar with in the Civil Rights Movement would be Dr. King. Dr. King's movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was founded around 1957, right after he had been invited to participate in the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, where he first preached his sermon. The Montgomery bus boycott was in 1955, and shortly after that, the Civil Rights Movement took upon a giant leap towards trying to do all of those things that we had been fighting for 300 years prior as the struggle continues. SCLC went on to be operated and run by Dr. King, who fought for social justice, social purpose, social action, voting rights, equal housing, integrated schools, and the list goes on and on. But with him, he had a number of soldiers that were a part of this movement with him. I can't mention them all right now, but as you take the virtual tour, you'll see the pictures on the wall of those folks who were involved in this struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. But Dr. King faced some adversaries within the ranks, and those were the younger people who were tired of the nonviolent movement and said that we needed to do something a little bit more aggressive. And there, at the end of that, as that conversation went back and forth, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was founded under the umbrella of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. However, those young people who began to march with King as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee began to take a turn because they weren't seeing action as quick as they wanted it to. So in 1966, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded under the leadership of John Lewis, and then shortly after that, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was founded out of Oakland, California. From that point, the young people made the change and made the difference. They were the ones who continued to push for a difference in this country for our people. The list goes on of persons that were involved. After the Panther Party, by 1972, organizations began to change their structure and began to change the direction that they were headed. Even though we had a right to go to the same schools, we had a right to go now to the bathrooms that were segregated and use the water fountains that were segregated, we still had a long way to go. We were able to have elected officials, mayors, city council persons, and of course, our first African American president of the United States. However, we still have a long way to go. The museum encompasses all of that and more. As you come down, if you get an opportunity to see the vast pictures and the stories that surround the Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library. The Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library also includes the Ellis County Wall of Fame. Dedicated in 2016, 20 people were nominated to be a part and on the wall here in the Ellis County Museum, Ellis County African American Hall of Fame. These people are African Americans who lived in the county or are still living in the county, who made great contributions to African American life in politics, education, religion, social action, social change, politics, and you name it. And those persons are honored here, along with the histories of many of the towns here in Ellis County, which includes a large collection of books by and about African Americans, and is the largest African American book collection in Ellis County. So take an opportunity to come down and join us on Saturdays when we're open from 10 to 5 o'clock, or you can perhaps make arrangements to make a tour. But come down and see for yourself where we started, the struggle and the journey that we took, and the struggle and the journey that we continue to take as we move towards equality, freedom, justice, equality, to level the playing field for African Americans here in the United States. Join us as we try to educate others. Once we know where we've been, then we know where we need to go. The Ellis County African American Hall of Fame Museum and Library is a bridge. It is a bridge of education. Once those are educated, perhaps they'll understand the plight, and we can come together to make this place the beginning point where we understand each other and move in unity for the same cause, and that's freedom, justice, and equality. Thank you for taking the tour. Have a great day.